Daniel chapter 2. All right, well, it was good to get into the book last week. A lot of history, and that was just scratching the surface for what could be or should be mentioned in the book of Daniel or leading up to it, because so much is going on. What a book. I'm going to break this chapter into 2 Sundays. This week we'll kind of cruise over for some of the things that God wants to speak directly into our life as we see so many correlations to how we live in the world that we do. And then next week, we're going to take some time and really look at the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had and its interpretation. Just because there's so much there that I really don't want to rush through it. Because as many of you know, that dream and the interpretation that God gives in this chapter is one of the foundations, one of the keys for almost all prophecy. And it affects all the way up into our day. And so I didn't really want to rush through that. So we're going to actually break this into a couple pieces. In this chapter, we really see to God be the glory. He is really the hero of all of these stories, this part of history that Daniel lays out in these 70 or so years that in the first 6 chapters. God is the hero. The palace for Daniel and his friends really started off as maybe like a safe haven. War came to their country. They were taken away. Family and friends perhaps killed or imprisoned, slavery. They got brought to this palace, which may have for a moment seemed like, hey, this is going to be all right. We were told by God that we're going to be carried away to Babylon and go ahead and make a life there. So here we are, we're in the palace, and we're going to have a life. We're going to be able to be his servants. We survived this first test. And now, we're going to be okay. We're going to have food, we're going to have jobs, we're going to be somebody important. But in chapter 2, for a while, it's going to take a bit of a turn. It's going to become a place where perhaps it's not so safe, where death will be pursuing them down. And that's the safety in this world. Just when one storm settles and we think we find, hey, we're gonna be all right here. We've got that job we needed. We got that place in the service of the government or whatever that we needed, and I'm gonna be all right. I'm set for life. And then the next storm comes. And that's what's in store for these boys in the chapter today. Daniel lived in one of the worst countries in history. Their disregard for life, idolatry, their pursuit of money and power. We're a lot like Daniel in many respects. That we too are living in a place that is difficult to deal with, and sometimes more difficult to deal with each day with the idolatry, whether it comes in the form of sports or money or power. And we also, like Daniel, are far from home. We kind of have that longing, we have that realization, this isn't our home. Though we may have a life or a job or whatever here, we're far from home. And this land gets more and difficult to deal with for a couple of reasons. One, this world that we live in is continuing to get worse. So that's not too exciting. But also, as 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18 says, "But we all, with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory, just as by the Spirit of the Lord." So like Daniel and his friends and like us in this world, the contrast between the world and us should be getting wider and wider. But see, they looked back for their home, back to Jerusalem one day. We'll get to go back there. But we look forward to a new Jerusalem. We look forward to that glorious home when we will know as we are known. Because where could we go in this world? There's nowhere real left that can escape the flood that is coming and now is. In chapter 1 taught, though, that in this world, and their Babylon, but our whole connected world as it is, taught us that we can do it. See, the world, both in chapter 1 and chapter 2, is constantly offering up excuses why you cannot do it. Whether it's your parents or your circumstances or your situation in life. But the Lord offered up these examples to show us that we can. With determined hearts, becoming men and women of conviction, and having the issue of the lordship of Christ already settled in our hearts. Who is supreme? Who makes the decisions in my life? Is it what I love or who I love? Is it what I want? Is it what will make me happy or comfortable? Or is it God? They had settled these things, and they showed that you can be a Daniel in Babylon. You can be a servant of the living God in any situation, and how to serve him. Daniel chapter 2, verse 1. Now in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. Then the king gave the command to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said to them, I have had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. So in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar. So this is probably actually the third year that the boys have been in there. A lot of people kind of count time differently. These guys generally, you would have your first year, but then your first year didn't actually start until after your first year was completed. So the second year was actually they were beginning into their third year of deportation, if it matters enough to wrap your brain around it. In Ecclesiastes 5:12, the sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep. Here's Nebuchadnezzar, arguably the most powerful man in human history. Not just because Babylon was the ruling power of the entire world, but God points out that his word was law. I don't know if there's ever been a person who, no matter what he said, good or bad, evil or not, whatever he spoke, that's what would be done. Anywhere in the world. That was Nebuchadnezzar. A rich, prosperous kingdom that he just inherited. And yet, here he is. He can't sleep. Could buy, could rule, could have anything in the world, but here he is. I can't sleep. My dreams are troubling me. I need some help. So as any king would, he gathers up all of his wise men. He gathers up his tarot card readers, his guys who are reading the stars and the Wiccans and so on and so forth. Anybody who uses signs or images or spells or incantations, anybody, bring them all to me. I need to know what's going on here. And it's interesting for Daniel and the boys that God uses so many things in our life. And sometimes we don't see him because we're not really looking. God gives a cruel king, Gentile king, a message from him. Now he didn't understand it, but God gave it to him. God has spoken through animals, such as a donkey. God has spoken through the evil high priest in Jesus' day, prophesied through him. God gave a dream to Pharaoh in Egypt with Joseph. Now, none of them had the ability to understand the things of God, but we are a type of people that should be looking for God when we look up in the stars. Not that God is the stars, but that all creation declares his glory. The stars proclaim it day in and day night and night. God uses whomever he wants. Now he gathers these people, and they made their money, they made their living, they had their livelihood by telling the secret things. That I can go into the spiritual realm and I can get you the answer that you wanted or that you want. And Nebuchadnezzar's going to put them to a test. Not entirely sure why, but he does. Worry. A 99-year-old woman was asked about the secret of her longevity. She said, "When I work hard. When I sit easy. And when I worry, I go to sleep." Earl Derby is quoted as saying that a speech generally cost him 2 nights' sleep. One, beforehand thinking what he should say, and the other afterwards in thinking how he could have said it much better. Like a rocking chair, worry gives you something to do but gets you nowhere. And I like this last one. A good memory check. What were you worried about this time last year? Things oftentimes that seem so important come and go so quickly. But Nebuchadnezzar doesn't have the Lord, and we're going to see a real contrast of those who can turn to God for mercy and those who are trusting in himself. See, Nebuchadnezzar had just inherited, just took over the kingdom, and immediately he began to worry and be troubled about his reign, about what was going on. What's the future going to be? Because as I amass all of these things, the more the things oftentimes have us. Jesus spoke on the deceitfulness of riches. You'd think that a man who has everything would worry about nothing, but the man who has everything and not the Lord worries about everything. Worry. The worries of the world. Let us not be caught up in them as Nebuchadnezzar is. Verse 4. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, "O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give the interpretation." The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, "My decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut into pieces, and your houses shall be made an ash heap. However, if you tell the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts, rewards, and great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and its interpretation." They answered again and said, "Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will give its interpretation." So Nebuchadnezzar throws out a little challenge, a little fleece for the boys. He said, "Life or death? Blessing or cursing? Are you real or are you fake? Do you have power or not?" Now, I don't know if he just wanted to get rid of these guys because these were the counselors of his father. Perhaps there's no grudge there. Maybe he didn't like him. Maybe they picked on him when he was a kid. I don't know. But he puts this out there, and he puts out an extreme consequence. Maybe even a little bit over the top. There's an old saying that if the response is greater than the stimulus, there's an underlying condition. So if I come home or whatever, we sit down after the afternoon, and perhaps my wife has made something for the family to eat. And puts it out on the table, makes it all nice, and so I have one other thing here. Let me get the garlic bread, and she brings it in, and it's a little bit burnt. And I stand up and I grab the plate and I throw it through the window. You say, what's really wrong? Obviously, there's an underlying condition. It's probably not the burnt toast. If I bring my wife home some flowers, mixed colors of roses, and she grabs them, throws them on the ground, says, "I hate red. Why'd you put red in there?" And she kicks over my guitar. There was probably something going on at home before I got there. There's probably an underlying condition. Probably the same case with Nebuchadnezzar. Not just a dream, but something going on. There's an underlying condition going on in his heart, the worry for his kingdom. What's going on? So he lays out this thing that for man is impossible. Now, some have gone back and forth whether or not Nebuchadnezzar knew what his dream was. Maybe he forgot, because there's a couple translations that seem to indicate that. But I think that Nebuchadnezzar definitely knew, or else how would he be able to test it? And besides, everyone's life depended upon him being able to confirm that's true or not. You told me what my dream was. So he lays this out for them, and this should be a good incentive, because you're probably going to give your all. You got this great reward, so that's pretty good incentive. Or you die, and your house is an ash heap. Let me weigh that out. If I can do it, I'm probably going to do it. Verse 8, the king answered and said, I know for certain that you would gain time, because you see that my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the time has changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered and said, there is not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such a thing of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. It is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. For this reason the king was angry and very furious, and gave the command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went out, and they began killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Here's a gentleman who has no use for useless religion. What am I paying you guys for? Sitting around eating off my table, giving you money. You're just going to gain time. You're going to speak lies and deceit. You know, almost like little Alice in Wonderland. Off with her head. Going to run around, take them all out. No mercy. If you guys can't tell me this, how can I ever expect to let you have a say in how the kingdom goes? How can I trust your counsel? Are you real or not? You see, they had a system of knowledge, and we know from archaeology that they had a number of books and things. So, like, if I had a dream, I could say, hey, tell me your dream. And they could look it up. Okay, this symbol means this, this symbol means this. And I could give you its interpretation from my wonderful knowledge. But you see, how often that's just man's spirituality that men and women create for themselves. That it's self-effort, a collection of human knowledge. If you have done this wrong, go home and say X amount of Hail Marys and it's going to be all right. If you need greater enlightenment, well, go up to the top of this mountain by this guy, fold your legs on the rock, and hum for 4 years, and you'll be enlightened. Of course, I exaggerate and I joke a little. But that's the end of man's religion, self-effort, acquisition of knowledge that men collect. But you see, that which comes from God is revelation, from God to man. It's not man's efforts or man's acquisition, but God's grace and mercy in his communication to people. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 11 through 14. You can turn there with me if you'd like. If not, I'll read it. You're getting it either way. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 11 through 14. It says something rather profound about the need for the Lord, the need for the Spirit of God in your life. 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 11 through 14 says, for what man knows the things of a man except the spirit of the man, which is in him? Even so, no one knows the things of God except the Spirit of God. Now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, that we might know the things that have been freely given to us by God. These things we also speak, not in words which man's wisdom teaches, but which the Holy Spirit teaches, comparing spiritual things with spiritual. But the natural man does not receive the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him. Nor can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. Nebuchadnezzar, no one can know these things unless he knows the Lord. And then again, as Daniel is going to bring on home, it's not because of the man, it's because of God's revelation. Because the Spirit of God has revealed it to you. Peter was so excited about his answer one day when Jesus said, well, who do people say that I am? Peter comes out with the home run answer. Man, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, you're right. But flesh and blood hasn't revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. If you come to a knowledge of the Lord, or if you know anything in your life that is truly of God or spiritual, it is not by your own attainment. It is by the revelation of the Spirit of God. And that's really what Christianity is. It's a religion, it's a faith, it's a belief based upon the revelation of God, who is Jesus Christ. Until you come to that knowledge, that revelation from God, you'll never know him. It'll be a Jewish man who was murdered by the Romans on a cross. How's he going to help you? It'll be foolish. The cross will be foolishness to you. These things will be foolishness to you, unless there is a living God and the Spirit of God has revealed them to you. No one can answer this. No one can tell him the secret, the hidden things, and that word's going to be used over and over, unless God reveals it. And what an opportunity here for God to set himself up as the God in Babylon, to be known as the Revelator, to be known as the God who answers, and not like the gods of the wise men, the Chaldeans and the soothsayers, but one who is alive and speaks. You know, Paul had a similar, probably not the same, but a similar thinking as Nebuchadnezzar. In 1 Corinthians 15:14, Paul said, if Christ isn't risen from the dead, our preaching is vanity. It's empty. It's worthless. He later went on a few verses later in verse 19 and said that if in this life only we have hope, we're to be pitied more than anybody else. Worthless religion, without a living God, without a revelation, without anything except for the acquisition of human knowledge and human effort. God makes a distinction here between the two, between his servants and what he can do, and what the servants of the false religions and their power. No man can do this. That's right. Perfect. If you got something you're seeking the Lord to do and nobody can do it, that might just be perfect. William Carey had a famous quote, one of the first missionaries in the modern movement. He said to attempt great things for God and expect great things from God. Because when it's beyond your ability, when it's beyond Daniel's ability or anyone in all of Babylon's ability, God will receive the glory. Verse 14, back in chapter 2. Then with counsel and wisdom Daniel answered Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is this decree from the king so urgent? Then Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. So Daniel went up and asked the king to give him time, that he might tell the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house and made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, his companions. So here we are, perhaps they can even know what's going on a few doors down. What's so urgent? Why are you just executing people? What's going on? And so the captain of the king's guard tells him. And I really believe that we're going to see a little bit of the power of a testimony here. Because of the testimony of the first chapter, because I don't need to have all the blessings of the king, I don't need to do all these things, I just need to serve God, and I'm going to serve God. And later we find in the end of chapter 1 that Daniel, as he's inspected by the king himself, is found 10 times better than all these other guys. And they lived for the Lord, and they were honest. They were wholehearted. Their testimony, I believe, was a real key into being able to go up to this guy who's executing people, that he doesn't execute you without listening to your question, for one. And two, you gain an audience with the king who just sent out the decree. Because I believe Daniel was upright. His character was known to them. And that he would have the ability to go up and ask such a question and to have an audience with the king himself when others were dying. In verse 17, then Daniel went to his house and verse 18, and that they might seek the mercies from God of heaven concerning this secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So they asked some time for mercy, to seek God. You know, it doesn't take very long, and I thought about pulling up a bunch of quotes of how many modern day teachers, preachers, whatever, are really instructing people, in their opinion, how to basically tell God what to do. That if you take this verse and you take this promise, you pray this way, God will have to. And they even use that kind of language. God will have to. Be careful with that. God gives us an amazing example here of guys who didn't say, we're going to go read 45 promises of God and tell him that it's his word and now he has to do it. He didn't do that. He said, we're going to go seek God for his mercy. We're going to go seek God for his character, who he is. We know who he is. And what I love by the end of the next couple chapters comes so clear that these guys so trust God, so know his character, so rest in his plan, that whether he allows us to die or whether he allows us to live, know this, we're going to honor him. Paul lived the same way. Whether by my life or by my death, Christ will be magnified in my body. See, oftentimes we get so caught up in these circumstances that we're tempted to try to tell God what to do because we know better, rather than trusting in his character, as these men did. Verse 19, then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever. For wisdom and might are his. And he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you. For you have made known to us the king's demand. Man, what a model. He exalts and thanks and praises and trusts God for who he is. That wasn't religion. That wasn't chants or secret prayers or hidden knowledge. This was a living God, a revelation from him that came born out of a relationship with him, that could go to him and ask him, that go to him and seek his mercy. Do you have that? Do you have that ability to go to God and ask him, to seek him for his characteristics? You know, we can have confidence in who He is. We can have confidence in His promises. I have no desire to erode your faith in the belief in the Word of God and what He said and the promises in your life. I just don't want you to try to become His boss. But Daniel, what a model. See, we don't have to figure God out. What a load off. We don't have to figure God out. We just simply need to believe and trust, understand what He has revealed. Not so much in what He hasn't or everything we don't know, but do you know and believe what you have, what has been revealed to you? So they asked God for an answer, the secret things. James 5:16 points to us that the prayer of a righteous man avails. It reveals much. James chapter 1, pray for wisdom and it shall be given. They prayed for the thing to be revealed, and they prayed for wisdom, and God answered just as He will for you in His time. You know, prayer meetings have a history of changing things. You don't need to look any farther, being the 4th of July, than some of the history of our country, in some of the first congresses and some of the first attempts to be free, to be able to worship the Lord. The prayers that were offered in the history that was changed. One book that's amazing is a book called Intercessor by Rees Howell, and how God answered and changed the course of battles and war because people prayed and sought God. To Nebuchadnezzar, this dream was darkness and worry. How am I going to hang on to my kingdom? How am I going to hang on to my riches and my power? Something's going on. I'm freaked out here. But now this dream to Daniel and the boys became light and life. I want to encourage you guys to continue to seek the Lord. Invite Him into your affairs of life, to intervene for you, to reveal things to you, to speak to the world, to the lost, to be that testimony and to be that witness. You know, we began this chapter out with the worries of the world. And now we have the testimony. Their testimony to the world was consistent, and it led them to a place where they could exalt God in front of those who did not believe in Him. Keep your testimony. Verse 24. Therefore Daniel went out to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation. Then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king, and thus said to him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. I love that. We probably all know a guy like that. They just spent all night in prayer, went to the king themselves, and bring him in. Hey, look what I found. You didn't find anything. Verse 26, the king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and He has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these. So here comes Daniel in, and he's going to give the revelation for it. You know, he could have, I specialize in this kind of thing, Nebuchadnezzar. We receive the answers. He doesn't. Daniel right away continues on from his prayer, and not only in the secret, in the quiet, in his prayer closet gave God the glory, honor, and praise, but he came out purpose in his heart, guns blazing for Nebuchadnezzar. There's a God in heaven. He's the one. Because it would be, we all have a hard time honoring the Lord the way we really know that He should be honored with our life. And who can be a Daniel in and day out? But all of us can say, man, it's God. If there was a job that went well, if there was something revealed, if there was something done, all of us can walk in as Daniel, and we can not only pray and thank God and give Him the glory in our prayers, but in life and say, to God be the glory. Forever and ever, amen. Not just be a closet glorifier, but out in public. A couple books back in Isaiah chapter 42, verse 8 and 9, Isaiah wrote this of the Lord speaking. Isaiah chapter 42, verse 8 and 9, where he says, I am the Lord, that is my name, and my glory I will not give to another, nor my praise to carved images. Behold, the former things have come to pass, and new things I declare. Before they spring forth, I tell you of them. And here God is not going to share His glory with Daniel. He's not going to share His glory with the false religion of Babylon. He's not going to share His glory with Nebuchadnezzar. He alone was able to declare this before it sprung forth. He alone will have the glory. And Daniel purposed in his heart that this would happen. How do we do that? 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 20 says, for you were bought with a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. You can do it. Both in your body and in the inner man, you are encouraged, commanded, and empowered by the Spirit of God to glorify Him. And as God does things in your life, glorify Him. Sometimes it's that simple, just making sure that everybody knows it wasn't me, it was the Lord. That person's not a great teacher, great preacher, that's the Lord. That person's not a great whatever, academic, at that particular job. God has His ways in the affairs of men. We must always look back to Him. It's all His. At every moment in history, every moment of your life, it's all His. And here we continue to see the humbled be exalted, and we're seeing the exalted being humbled. And this is really much of the underlying current for these first few chapters. That if you exalt yourself, you will be humbled. If you humble yourself, you will be exalted. Verse 29. As for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while on your bed about what would come to pass after this. And He who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. But as for me, the secret has not been revealed to me, because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes, who make known the interpretation to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. He gives a couple reasons for the interpretation, not only for God's glory, but also, Daniel says He did it for us. He did it for God's people. And He did it so that King Nebuchadnezzar could know the thoughts of his heart. Well, the reason why He's going to give all of this. Now, Nebuchadnezzar has come and gone, but God's people are still around. In 1 Corinthians 10 and Romans 15, God says that He kept these things. He's written these things so that we would be built up, encouraged, taught, instructed. These things are still for us today. It is the word for today. God's word is living and active and able to build you up, to strengthen and to encourage you. Daniel knew how to treat his enemies long before Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount, because God's character didn't change. The wise men enjoyed the Spirit of God's work through God's people, much like people do today. You know, you guys are a part with your testimony, with the Spirit of God in your life. You're a part of God actually restraining evil in this world. Now, the world doesn't like it. The wise men of Babylon's day is not going to like Daniel and them, though they directly benefited from it. You know, there's a time coming when the Spirit of God is no longer going to work in the world as he does today. That the church is going to be removed and all of their wishes will be granted. I wish they'd stop telling us to live this way, or I wish they'd stop telling us this is what God wants, or this is what the Bible says. Someday that's going to be answered. They're going to realize that God was actually working for their benefit, was actually saving their life. See, because there's a couple things. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, God says that he's now restraining, and that when he stops restraining, when that one is taken out of the way, the Antichrist, the man of sin, will be revealed. The tribulation will begin. God's judgment will fall upon the earth. And billions will die. It's a harsh reality. But people are currently blessed because God is still at work today in his people. They didn't realize that, and people today don't realize that. That like with Daniel and the boys, or with Noah, or Lot, that the judgment of God could not fall on Sodom until Lot was removed. One interesting little side notes. I was watching a video yesterday, so kind of got me on women's liberation. So, no tomatoes just yet. Because I really believe that we should always be about encouraging the women of God in our life, in our community, in our world, to be all that God made them to be. And complete in him. It was once said, it's a man's world. But when a baby is born, they ask, how is the mother? When you're married, they say, what a beautiful bride. And when you die, they say, how much did you leave her? In the 1920s, the state of Kansas was swung into line into the suffrage movement amendment as a result of an open debate in which a suffragette, a young lady, changed the whole debate in that state with one sentence. When the opposition argued that women could not be relied upon to exercise good judgment in voting because they changed their minds too often. So that was the argument there to keep things the way it was in Kansas. And a young woman cried out from the crowd. She said, I would like to ask my honorable opponent if he had ever tried to change a woman's mind after she had made it up. That changed the way things went. The first woman driver in the United States was Mrs. Eva Mudge Nelson, who drove a Waverly electronic car in New York in 1898. The next year, she was driving race cars. So why did I go off on that? I was actually watching a video, I believe it was on Fox News, some YouTube video yesterday. And it was interesting because this lady was a self-described feminist, and she wrote a book, and she had a number of provocative things to say. A lot of it was pretty interesting, but this one kind of caught my ear above all else as she was writing her book. She had really felt that the women's movement had been hijacked, that maybe they had made some mistakes along the way. And one thing that she noted was one thing they believed they went wrong was that they had taught women that they should want what men have. They should want to be like that. They should want to have that. They should want to do that. And it hasn't produced the results that they wanted. They had went in and said, well, what would really make you happy is if that you were the CEO. Or maybe even that you made more money. Or that you had the power or the authority or whatever. Whatever he's got, you'd have. Which we know that struggle goes back to the beginning. But one other thing that, besides also other things that the 70s didn't produce that were good, she noticed that there had been several studies done, and they began back in 1970. Really kind of since the force of women's liberation movement had really pushed. And the study showed that without fail, for the first 35 years, every year, women were increasingly less happy. By every measurement that they could take, women were not as happy as they used to be. And yet, many were becoming CEOs and breaking the glass ceiling and having this and having that. But each year, and I couldn't find the study for it, but she made the claim all the way up until basically this year that without fail, almost every year, women have decreased in their happiness. And it's not because they haven't gained more right. I believe it's because they bought into an image that the world tried to sell them. That if you graduate with this degree, then you'll be happy. If you have this job, and then you'll be happy. If you have this position in your marriage, then you'll be happy. Rather than you are complete in Him. That you find who you are and your value in the eyes of the living God. Giving Him the glory that He is the Lord of your life. See, all of this modern movement tried to sell something that was by man's achievement and according to man's wisdom. God has a great plan for His women, whether you are a Ruth or a hard charging Deborah, whoever God has made you to be. But don't define yourself by the world's image. Don't buy into what it is selling. Because as these wise people of His days, they had nothing to offer. But God has made a revelation for your sake. And that you would know Him and His heart for your life. And like any mediocre preacher, I am running too long. Verse 31 through 45, I was going to go ahead and read it, but for time's sake, I'm going to leave that for next week. We're going to cover that section next week. But I would like to look at the conclusion of 46 through 49. Please read verse 31 through 45 when you get a chance. But to kind of wrap up some of the thoughts we're currently on, verse 46, then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face prostrate before Daniel and commanded that they should present an offering and incense to him. The king answered Daniel and said, truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and the revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret. Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. Also Daniel petitioned the king and set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel sat in the gate of the king. The humbled are exalted, God is glorified. Let your light so shine before men that they glorify God. This king, the head of gold, as we'll see, says, man, your God is God. But one thing I would like to remind you of before we close is that God is the rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. In 1 Corinthians 15:58, he says, your labor is never in vain. And the Bible shows us, see, because here we know that the dream was revealed to Daniel, but then he turns around and says, but my friends as well, they prayed with me. And the Bible teaches us that you may not be the one who's sent. You may be the sender. You may not be the one who is teaching and sharing in Vacation Bible School, but you can pray, and you can be blessed and rewarded right alongside of them. Do what you can, and God will bless you for that. Don't worry about what you can't do. Do what you can. And you can pray, the bare minimum, for the Lord and for His glory. Daniel had purpose in his heart that no matter what, he would depend on the mercy of God and that God would receive the glory. Not everyone will be a Daniel, but anybody can say, man, it's God. Man, it's God. So we started out with the worries of the world. Are you going to be like Nebuchadnezzar or trust in God? Get rid of the useless and man-made religion. Maintain your testimony. There is a God. He will work and use you. Give him the glory. Your life will make a difference. Keep praying, keep sharing, and living for him. And remember that your labor is never in vain in him.